The grand hall stood silent, its vast emptiness echoing the weight of unspoken words and hidden agendas. King Theodore, once vibrant and commanding, now appeared frail, a shadow of his former self. His once bright eyes, now dulled by the passage of time, reflected the burdens of leadership and the toll it had taken on his spirit. His eyes, dimmed with age and worry, scanned the faces of his advisors. Each glance was a desperate search for reassurance, a silent plea for loyalty in a sea of uncertainty. Each face, once familiar and comforting, now seemed etched with a disquieting blend of pity and something colder ambition. The very air seemed to crackle with the tension of unspoken rivalries and hidden motives. Theodore's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of suspicion echoing his worst fears. Betrayal. The word lingered in his mind, a dark cloud overshadowing his thoughts. It clung to the air like a bitter winter frost, chilling the warmth of camaraderie that once filled the hall. The coldness seeped into his bones, a stark reminder of the isolation that power often brings. His gaze fell upon Lord Elmsworth, his most trusted advisor, a man who had been by his side since childhood. Memories of shared victories and mutual respect flashed before his eyes, now tainted by the shadow of doubt. Elmsworth, usually a picture of unwavering loyalty, now avoided his gaze. The once steadfast eyes now flickered with unease, a telltale sign of a troubled conscience. His eyes darted nervously, his fingers fidgeting with the signet ring on his hand. The ring, a symbol of their brotherhood, felt like a serpent's coil tightening around Theodore's heart. The ring, a symbol of their brotherhood, felt like a serpent's coil tightening around Theodore's heart. The weight of its significance now felt like a burden, a reminder of the fragile trust that bound them. The king saw the subtle glances exchanged between Elmsworth and the others, their whispers barely audible, but laden with unspoken truths. The air was thick with the tension of concealed intentions and hidden alliances. Doubt gnawed at the king's resolve. Had his judgment faltered? Had the years of prosperity blinded him to the rot festering within his own court? Had the years of prosperity blinded him to the rot festering within his own court? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow, a realization that his reign might be crumbling from within. The weight of his suspicions pressed down upon him, heavy and suffocating. Each breath felt labored, as if the very air conspired to crush his spirit. He yearned to dismiss his fears, to believe in the loyalty of those he had always trusted. But the nagging doubt refused to be silenced, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind. But the truth, like a venomous serpent, had sunk its fangs into his heart, injecting its poison of doubt. The venom spread, clouding his judgment and eroding his confidence. The grand hall, once a symbol of his power and authority, now felt like a gilded cage. The walls that once protected him now seemed to close in, a prison of his own making. Theodore, the king, was now a prisoner of his own failing health, and the growing suspicion that those he trusted the most were the architects of his downfall. The throne, once a seat of power, now felt like a trap. The silence stretched on, each tick of the ornate clock on the wall a hammer blow to his dwindling hope. Time, once his ally, now seemed to mock him with its relentless march. The king retired to his chambers, his mind a whirlwind of doubt. His once unshakable faith in his advisors crumbled around him like ancient mortar. Memories, once comforting, now mocked him. He recalled Elmsworth's unwavering support during the early years of his reign, his counsel always measured and wise. They had faced rebellions together, weathered political storms, and celebrated victories. Now, those shared experiences felt like poisoned arrows, each memory a painful reminder of the trust he had so freely given. He remembered the lavish feasts, the opulent balls, the endless stream of extravagant gifts he had bestowed upon his advisors as tokens of his gratitude. Had those gestures of generosity been misinterpreted as weakness? Had his pursuit of pleasure blinded him to the ambition festering in their hearts? The more he dwelled on their recent behavior, the more convinced he became of their treachery. The veiled whispers, the averted gazes, the subtle shifts in their demeanor, they all pointed towards a conspiracy brewing beneath the surface of courtly decorum. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He was a lion surrounded by jackals, his once sharp claws blunted by age and illness. Sleep, once an escape from the burdens of the crown, now eluded him. He tossed and turned on his silken sheets, haunted by visions of betrayal. Each creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the window pane, sounded like the stealthy footsteps of assassins. He was a king under siege, not from foreign armies, but from the very people he had trusted with his life. The weight of his suspicions bore down on him, heavy and suffocating. Each passing day the burden grew, gnawing at his conscience and eroding his peace of mind. He had spent his days lost in the intoxicating whirl of courtly life, a life filled with opulence and grandeur. The court was a place of endless festivities, where the line between day and night blurred in the haze of revelry. Reveling in the pleasures of the flesh and the intoxicating allure of power, he had become a shadow of the man he once was. The laughter of jesters and the clinking of goblets had become the soundtrack of his existence. Grand balls, extravagant feasts and lavish hunts had become the order of his days, each event more opulent than the last. The kingdom's coffers were drained to fund these endless spectacles, each one more opulent than the last, a testament to his insatiable desire for excess. The once prudent king had become a figurehead of indulgence. The kingdom, once prosperous and thriving under his rule, had slowly begun to crumble under the weight of his neglect. The fields that once yielded bountiful harvests now lay barren, and the villages that buzzed with activity now stood eerily silent. The pleas of his subjects, burdened by unfair taxes and dwindling harvests, had fallen on deaf ears. Their cries for help were drowned out by the music and laughter that filled the palace halls. He had dismissed their concerns, choosing instead to surround himself with sycophants who whispered sweet nothings and fueled his delusions of grandeur. These flatterers shielded him from the harsh realities outside the palace walls. The once bustling markets now stood half empty, the vibrant commerce replaced by a haunting stillness. Merchants who once thrived now struggled to make ends meet, the laughter of children replaced by the hollow groans of hunger. Families that once lived in comfort now faced the harsh reality of scarcity and want. The once imposing walls of his city, symbols of his might, now seemed tarnished, stained by the tears of his people. The grandeur of the past was now a distant memory, overshadowed by the present decay. Theodore had become a prisoner of his own making, trapped within the gilded cage of his palace, oblivious to the suffering he had inflicted upon his people. The walls that once protected him now felt like barriers, isolating him from the world outside. He had traded the love of his subjects for fleeting pleasures, his heart hardened by the intoxicating allure of power. The adoration he once commanded had turned into resentment and disdain. Now, as he stared out at the desolate landscape of his kingdom, a profound sense of guilt washed over him. The realization of his failures was inescapable, a stark contrast to the grandeur he had once known. The realization struck him like a bolt from the blue. He had failed his people. The weight of his actions, or rather his inactions, bore down on him with an unbearable intensity. He had broken the sacred vow he had taken upon his coronation, the vow to protect and cherish his kingdom and its people. The crown that once symbolized his duty now felt like a shackle, a constant reminder of his broken promises. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, heavier than any crown. The path to redemption seemed distant, but the first step was acknowledging the depth of his transgressions. Desperation clawed at the king's mind, driving him to a decision that would shock his court and send ripples of anxiety through the kingdom. He would seek an audience with Queen Isolde, his fiercest rival and ruler of the neighbouring kingdom. For years their kingdoms had teetered on the brink of war, their rivalry a legend whispered in hushed tones. Seeking her aid was a gamble, a dangerous dance with a viper. The court was in an uproar, unable to fathom the king's decision. Whispers of betrayal and madness filled the air, but Theodore remained resolute. Isolde, with her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, was known for her ruthless ambition and her unwavering pursuit of power. Her reputation as a cunning and formidable leader was well earned, and many feared her as much as they respected her. To turn to her for help was to invite the serpent into his own garden, to risk his kingdom on the whims of a woman who had every reason to see him fall. Yet, in his desperation, Theodore saw no other choice. He was a drowning man clinging to a viper, hoping against hope that it wouldn't strike. The weight of his decision bore heavily on his shoulders, each step towards his writing desk feeling like a march to the gallows. He penned a message, his hand trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The words flowed with a blend of humility and veiled threats, a delicate balance of pleading and promising. He requested a secret meeting, a plea for assistance cloaked in veiled threats and promises of future alliances. The messenger departed, carrying with him the fate of the kingdom and the last vestiges of the king's pride. Theodore could only wait, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum, each beat a terrifying echo of his impending doom. The days that followed were an agonizing torment. The silence from Isolde was deafening, each passing hour amplifying his fear and uncertainty. He paced his chambers like a caged lion, his mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and desperate prayers. Had he made a grave error in judgment? Had his desperation blinded him to the folly of trusting his sworn enemy? The court watched him with wary eyes, their faith in his leadership wavering. The once proud and confident king now seemed a shadow of his former self, consumed by doubt and fear. The kingdom held its breath, waiting for a response that could either save them or seal their doom. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no word from Isolde. The tension in the air was palpable, a heavy shroud that hung over the kingdom. Theodore's nights were sleepless, haunted by nightmares of betrayal and ruin. He knew that his decision would either be his salvation or his undoing. And so he waited, each day a test of his resolve, each moment a reminder of the precarious dance he had chosen to engage in with his most dangerous enemy. The kingdom watched and waited with bated breath, the fate of their world hanging in the balance. Would Isolde respond? And if she did, what would her answer be? The future was uncertain, and the king's gamble had set the stage for a confrontation that would change the course of history. The silence from Isolde was deafening, each passing hour amplifying his fear and uncertainty. He paced his chambers like a caged lion, his mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and desperate prayers. He paced his chambers like a caged lion, his mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and desperate prayers. Had he made a grave error in judgment? Had his desperation blinded him to the folly of trusting his sworn enemy? Had he made a grave error in judgment? Had his desperation blinded him to the folly of trusting his sworn enemy?